All righty. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome this morning from the Indiana IEP Resource Center. My name is Angie McKinney, and I'm one of the consultants with the center. I'm really excited about this particular webinar. This is new to our catalog this year, but it's something that is kind of required training for public agency representatives that school districts should be putting on every year. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. And so we really felt like this was a need to provide this to the state. I do want to let everyone know we have a captioner this morning that is live captioning, and you can turn on your closed captions using your Zoom controls. If that doesn't work, I put a link in the chat and you can click that link and be able to see the captions as well. Because we know, just like for kids, closed captioning is not just helpful for those with hearing difficulties, but also just for increased attention. We have a lot of people that turn their captions on TV even when they can hear just fine. So absolutely tap into that if you would like. I will apologize to our captioner, Kara, ahead of time because I'm going to be talking pretty fast, and I know that makes it difficult. So, I'll give her credit to try and keep up. But we have a ton of stuff to cover, which is part of the reason why I sent out a link, at least to most of you. Some of you who may have signed on a little later may have not had this link, but a link to the Padlet that has some videos, because I knew there's so much to cover. We can't cover it all in an hour and a half. So there were 3 videos that I asked you to watch in advance. Now I am going to cover a little bit out of those videos, kind of woven into everything else, but I didn't want to spend the majority of the time on those things. So if you have questions along the way, please just post it in the chat and I'll try to make sure that you get your questions answered. So the agenda today, we're going to review those 3 video resources that I asked you to look at. Then we're going to move into talking about some key ways that you can support meetings going well, those effective case conference kind of practices, especially in the role as the public agency representative. Then we'll move into talking about manifestation determinations, and one of our funnest things to do, and some of the things that you need to know to be able to do them correctly, do them on time, also things that you can do to help avoid ever getting there in the first place. And then finally, we'll wrap up the session with 10 tips for just staying in compliance, things that you can do in your role as a public agency representative that will help keep your district above board, out of hot water, and serving students according to the law. So this is the link to the Padlet. So if any of you were having any difficulty with this, you may want to try it again from here. I'm not sure why it wouldn't have worked before, but we'll make sure that we figure it out so that you can have access to these things, because there are some videos. Those videos are very short, but they're things that you can go back to if you need to say, I don't remember when I have to send the notice out. I don't remember who all is required versus recommended at a case conference. So those kinds of things you can always look back on. And we may add some additional videos, resources, or other documents over time. So keep this Padlet link marked in your bookmarks. So we're going to start with reviewing what I put in the video on the public agency representatives. First of all, we don't just get to be the representative by nature of our position or somebody giving us that title. The law actually tells us that we have to have a public agency representative, but Article 7 tells us some criteria for who can serve in that role, because not everybody can. First, it says that we have to have a person in that role who is knowledgeable about the availability of and has the authority to commit the resources of the public agency, which means if I'm serving as the PAR, the public agency representative, I have to know what's going on. I have to know what's out there that I could get my hands on, that we have time for, we have personnel for, all of that kind of stuff. But by nature of being in that position, I'm also the person who can say, yes, we can put this in the IEP and I'm going to stand behind it. That's the role. I've been in a lot of meetings where somebody says, well, I don't really have the authority to say we can do that. So, we're not going to put it in there right now. You can't do that. I mean, if you can anticipate that there are needs, we need to have the conversation ahead of time. But if I don't even know what my district offers, then I'm really not a person who should be in the role of a public agency representative. Second qualification is that I have to either be qualified to provide specially designed instruction or special education services, or to supervise the provision of those services. That's, I can either be somebody with a special ed background or administrators that can supervise those services being offered. But then I also have to have a background and understanding about the general ed curriculum. So not everybody fits this role. If you think about all of the staff members that you have within your building, some of those staff members can fill all these criteria and some cannot. And so in general, we're talking about people within your building who tend to meet these criteria, being building administrators at some level, district administrators, or it also allows for a designee. Now, a designee means I am normally in that role, but I have said that you can fill that role and you meet the criteria. So it's my responsibility, if I'm designating someone to be a public agency representative, to make sure that that person, again, knows about the resources, has the authority to commit them, and also can either provide or supervise specially designed instruction, and knows about the general education curriculum. So I know that there are a lot of districts who may have designated somebody to be the PAR designee for meetings that maybe doesn't fit those roles. And that can be problematic in a lot of different ways. So if you're the person who is handing this off, you ask those questions. Do they really meet the criteria? And the bottom line is you have to ask, am I comfortable? Can I stand behind this person committing resources on behalf of our school, our district? Because if you're not, then that person probably shouldn't be in that role. So I'm just going to watch the chat here for a second. Are there any specific questions just about who the PAR can be, or any concerns about that piece? It's fairly straightforward. Okay, if any of those come up, then I will kind of backtrack to that. Okay, so the other two videos that I asked you to watch, one was about who needs to be at conferences, who are those required members that need to be there. And then the other piece was around the notice of procedural safeguards. And again, both of those topics will be kind of covered to some extent within these next two sections, but just not as extensively as what's in the video. I think the video is a lot more succinct about just that topic. So we're going to look at case conferences. Our staff has a small staff of people who do facilitated IEP meetings. And those meetings are generally requested by parents and schools when previous meetings have just not gone very well for one reason or another. And some of the things that lead to those specific problems or specific roadblocks in meetings usually have to do with these issues. So either problems with communicating with each other, either before, during, or even after a meeting, not coming in prepared, clarity about the information in the IEP, clarity about what we're discussing during the meeting, lots of issues on, from all angles related to respect, and then things related to transparency too. We're kind of speaking a foreign language at meetings a lot of times when it comes to parents. We have some parents who know special education inside and out. We have others who have very little knowledge related to education and specifically to special education. And it is like we're speaking a foreign language. And so being as clear and transparent as we can is really, really important to make sure that we are working as a collaborative team and that we're all working together in order to create the appropriate program for the student. So we're going to talk about some of those issues, and we're going to do this using clustering things around. Here are things you can do even before the meeting happens that can help. Here are some things that you can do during the meeting. And then ultimately, after the meeting, there's some key things that need to happen that can also help set a more positive tone. So before the meeting, there's a lot that happens before an IEP meeting. And again, I want to try to focus in on where you as public agency representatives can have some influence into making it better, because you're not always setting up meetings. You're not always even running meetings in many cases. A lot of your teachers of record are doing basically the coordination and the running of the meeting. But not always the case. It's not defined roles necessarily. So beforehand, we know that the law says that we hold meetings at a mutually agreed upon time and place. That's hard to make happen, especially the bigger your team gets that is meeting on a student, and the more complex a student is, the more likely that you are going to run into, jumped ahead of me. And the more likely that you're going to have some difficulty with that. So make sure and get plenty of notice. Make sure that we are offering multiple dates, and start with the parent schedule first. Once we have the parent schedule, then we can work our schedule around that. Because we've got some flexibility on some of the players who need to come to meetings. Make sure that you're putting this in writing. That is a piece that is part of the law. Now, we have within the Indiana IEP system, there is a notice that is generated, and make sure you're using that notice. And here's why. I've been to lots of meetings where the parent has gotten email invites, Google Calendar invites, whatever it is, that helps get them there. And the parents do come. I mean, that's really what we want more than anything, is we want parents to be there and be part of the meeting. However, those invitations do not have all the things that are required as part of the prior written notice for a meeting, such as, we know we have to tell them when, where, what date, all that kind of good stuff. But we have to tell them who we're inviting, who's going to fill these different roles. We also have to make sure and tell them things like that they can bring somebody, that, here are all the things to do when you're not happy, all the things that show up on this, on the notice that the system generates. So make sure that we're sending that in ahead of time. The notice also has the piece built into it that will request an excusal for a required member who is either not going to be there at all, or who is going to have to leave for part of the meeting. And so if you don't use this system, you don't have that documentation. So having that in place is going to be really important. So making sure that that's what your teachers are doing, and not just using, phone calls, emails, etc. I see the question, suggestions for, I'm not sure what NOCs are. Oh, notice of conference. Okay. Oh, that is a great question. Well, it should be quicker now within the system to be able to get kids into the Indiana IEP system as long as you've run the real-time report, it should be able to pull the kids in quicker, I think, even with the new system. But honestly, I'm not sure. I would say what you need to do is, if that happens a lot, is take that notice and create one in like a Word document so that you make sure that you're covering all of the legal requirements that have to be in that notice. You are very welcome. All right, so let's talk about roles. And again, I'm not going to go over all of the roles just because the Padlet video will tell you all of that stuff fairly quickly. But make sure that if there is a legal role that has to be there, that they're actually there. I wouldn't proceed with a meeting that didn't have all the required bodies there, because you're looking for trouble when that happens. It gives something that is complainable. So it is really important that we have all those required roles. Now, I want to recognize reality, and especially in the times that we're in right now, that people get sick in the middle of the day. People call in that morning when you haven't anticipated that somebody can't be there. There are kind of ways to get around that by, approaching the parent at the start of a meeting and saying, I am so sorry, but, the teacher went home with a sick child in the middle of the day. We've got a couple of options. We can get an excusal. We can get a different teacher to come in so that we have some information that's important about the gen ed curriculum. We can reschedule this meeting. I mean, give the power back to the parent in this case, and allow them to help make that decision. It is really important that everyone who's there knows why they're there. And that may take some training of staff to help them understand, what is my part in this meeting? Because, you may be able to think back to a time where you were a member of a case conference committee and you thought, why am I sitting here? What, I know I'm filling a role and I was asked to be here, but why am I actually sitting here? So if you can train staff, that is really important, and also prep them for what they should be bringing to the table. What data do I need? What documents, what access, what examples, all of those things are really important. You don't want people leaving to go gather stuff and not be prepared. This is really, it's almost a marketing kind of thing. You want to present your school as, we are prepared. We know this student. We're ready to help support this kiddo. I've been at a meeting where I had a teacher come in and sit next to the parent and say, I'm your daughter's teacher. Now, I don't remember, which one is she? You don't want to be in that situation. So again, making sure that everyone has a good understanding, that is something that as a public agency representative, you can help bolster that up and have some discussions at staff meetings to say, this is how you can be prepared as a child's teacher, as a provider, as anyone who's going to be part of these meetings. Part of the role of the gen ed teacher, that has been something that's been a little bit harder for teachers to kind of wrap their brain around, why am I here? The student is in special ed. I'm a gen ed teacher. I think that's changing somewhat. Over time, I think we're getting more to that inclusive mindset of all kids are all our kids. But specifically letting gen ed teachers know that when you are in a meeting that is a case conference, you are the expert about the gen ed curriculum. Special ed teacher is not. The special ed teacher is typically working with students from multiple grade levels. They cannot be the expert on the gen ed curriculum for that particular grade. The gen ed teacher is also somebody who is seeing what's happening in the classroom, the students' performance academically as well as their behavior. They can also give some really good feedback on the things that they're already doing. You know, they're the ones to say, you know, every time I tell this kid I need to read this to you, he has a meltdown. Or when I ask him to leave to have some extra time for this assignment, he refuses to go. Or, you know, here are also some things that I'm doing in the classroom that seem to be working and they're not on the IEP. So maybe we can get those on the IEP. They've got a good comparison to non-disabled students too. And that's one thing that I think is really important. And I've seen this kind of go south in case conferences before, where we're talking about a student and we talk about, yeah, the student's struggling with A, B, and C, but sometimes that's typical as opposed to something related to disability. And that is a great place to have your gen ed teachers, even if it's prompting, you as the public agency representative, you can prompt them to say, now, how are other students in your class doing with this? Because if that is, you know, if you're talking about a kid who's really struggling with getting out of their seat and forgetting to ask permission, but they're a kindergarten student and lots of students are struggling with this, then it's probably not disability related. It's age related. It's developmentally related. And when it comes from that general education kindergarten teacher, then it makes sense. It makes sense to parents to say, oh, okay, this is not something I should really be worried about right now. They should also be bringing data. Not just the special education teacher brings data. It's important that the gen ed teacher is bringing their own set of data to the conferences. Try to avoid excusals when you can, because everyone who is a required member does have a key role. You have to make sure that if anybody's going to be leaving, that the parents know in advance. If it's a required member, you do need to have that written excusal prior to the meeting. We can do it as a courtesy for those non-required members, and we don't have to have written permission for that to happen. Now, you may battle with this sometime where a parent says, I'm not going on with this meeting if this person leaves, but that person is not required. And then you have to balance, you know, trying to make this collaborative and trying to work together with the parent versus we've got to have this meeting. And you may want to continue the meeting or you may want to table it and reschedule when that person can be there again. But again, the important thing is for you to know who's required and who is extra. Okay. And again, this was also in the video, but it is important to know that if I'm not going to be at the meeting, or I'm not going to be at the part of the meeting where I would be providing my input and I'm a required member, then I have to give written input to the development of the IEP to both the parent and the team. And sometimes we forget to do this. We get the excusal, but then we don't get the written input to make sure that that person's role is really represented in the development of the IEP. So you may also have some of our other friends there. So you may have attorneys there, which means you're going to have longer meetings. You may have advocates there, which can be challenging sometimes, but I really have found that most of the time when we have advocates or parent support personnel there, they can be extremely helpful in helping to kind of bridge that trust gap and communication gap with the parents. You may have other service providers who are not required. You may also have outside service providers from outside of your school corporation. Parents can bring anyone. You may have interpreters. You may have ASL interpreters, or you may have a language interpreter for, for Spanish or any other language. It is the parent's right to bring whoever they deem that has knowledge or expertise regarding the student. And they don't have to tell you. However, if I'm bringing a posse with me, it's going to require a bigger room. And so I always just tell parents, you definitely can bring anyone that you feel like is needed. But if you could let me know, that would be helpful. By the same token, schools can do the same. If schools determine that the math teacher should be there because that's really important, even if the parent doesn't like the math teacher, then it's for the school to decide that person it needs to be there, or the school counselor or somebody like that within our system. If it's outside of this system, we would have to get permission from the parent to have that person involved anyway. I think most of you have probably heard this many times from your district before, but if the parent does show up with an attorney, best practice or common practice is we now table this meeting and we reschedule when our attorney can be present as well. And I would feel the same way if I was a parent and I showed up and the district had an attorney present. I wouldn't have that meeting without also having an attorney present on my side. So I see that there is a question. Is written permission required for gen ed teachers to leave the meeting early to get back to their class? Absolutely. If the parent or if the teacher is the one teacher who is serving the role of the gen ed teacher. So you got to figure out who is going to be that role. They need to be there from start to finish or have an excusal form. And they either need to be, even if they've been excused, they have to attend the part of the meeting that they need to give some input into, or they need to give written input if they're not going to be there for that part. And to me, the gen ed teacher, we need them for the present levels. We need them when we're talking about behavior. We need them when we're talking about goals, accommodations. To me, they really have a place throughout the meeting as far as really good input. But yeah, and that's something that I think, probably a more common practice has been to say, Mrs. Jones needs to get back to class. Is that okay? And the parent says, yeah, sure. And then we just let them go. And that's not really following the law, which makes it more complicated. However, again, we want to be above board and following the law as precisely as we can in order to make sure that we're really meeting the students' needs. All right. I'm going to check the other questions really quickly here. The written input, it doesn't really say what the written input looks like. It needs to be written, meaning so the parent can see it before the meeting and also the team. But it may be things I've seen some high school teachers do a fantastic job with this because you've got lots of different gen ed teachers for most of our students. And so sending out something in advance just to say, okay, well, tell me how the student's doing academically. Are they missing any assignments? What's their current grade? What have their test scores been versus their homework scores? Tell me about behavior. Are they using their accommodations? Do you have any other input that would be helpful? All the things that you think about that we're pulling from them during the meeting conversation. Again, there's no specific format that it needs to be in, and some of their input might go in present levels, and some of it might be just used to develop other parts of the IEP. So again, when it comes to somebody that is employed by the district that it has knowledge or expertise regarding the student, if the school determines that that person needs to be invited, then you should invite them. But as the public agency representative, you have to know when to pick your battles too. You want to create a good plan for a student, but if it's going to come down to a fight or a parent saying, I am not coming to this meeting if you invite Mrs. So-and-so because I don't like that person. And I see this happen a lot of times when maybe a student's been in trouble for disciplinary issues, and maybe the assistant principal or the dean has been somebody who typically handles discipline, and have a parent say, that person is not coming. But that person tends to serve as the par. Pick a different par, get the principal to come in on that one. There are times when it's not worth the battle, but there are times when it is. And again, I can't tell you what to do in any individual situation, but I think, as long as you're doing what's right for the student and you're trying to work with the parent, then you're probably making the right decision. Okay, I'm going to keep going for a little bit, and then I will look back to some of the other questions. All right, make sure you've got good meeting space. I mean, we've all probably sat at little kids' tables during a meeting, or we've been in a room that's been so packed that everybody has trouble even getting in. Just think about what you need. Think about making sure that the room is already set up, that if you're going to project, that you have the capability to do that, and that everything's working. As parent, have any mobility issues, or any of your staff members, or maybe they'll be bringing a stroller that has 2 kids in it. You have to think about some of those things in advance, and making sure that everyone is at the table, and that everyone is in basically an adult chair if that's the size that they need. I've been in too many situations where a parent has been in a chair that could have fallen apart at any minute, and then maybe the administrator sitting in the cushioned rolly chair. Err on the side of making the parent comfortable. I mean, that's really important. Prepare as much as you can. I mean, anything that will cut down on the length of a conference when you can cut some time out is helpful. I mean, because we really have so much to do in such a short period of time, that if you have outside reports, summarize them ahead of time if you've got your hands on them. You may show up to a meeting where something gets pushed across the table, and you're told, well, I got this evaluation done, let's make sense of it. But if we can summarize those things, if we can take weeks of data that we've collected and put it into a chart, it's going to be more understandable. It's going to cut to the chase. Make sure that if there's data that needs to be collected, it gets done prior to the meeting. We don't want to show up and say that we have no baseline for a goal that we're writing because we didn't collect any data on it. We should be able to anticipate most of those things. I would say too, and as a school psychologist, if there are any of my fellow colleagues out there, we can get kind of wordy, and I would never want to sit and read my evaluation report for the student at the meeting. We need to be able to summarize that in a way that is digestible for the group. It shouldn't take long for me to cut to the chase and say, we did a bunch of stuff. Here are the major findings, and here's what it means for us now, whether it's meaning related to eligibility, planning in the IEP, the services the student might need, but we need to boil that down to its essence when we're at a meeting. Nobody wants to read our reports in the first place. So we don't want to force them to read it through, human audible either. So just working with your staff on how to cut some of that down so that most of our time is spent really developing the plan. I think that's an important piece. Anything that we need to give to the parent in advance, go ahead and make that happen. I do want to just tell you that the draft IEP is something that a lot of districts do. I personally think it's a great idea to send out some preliminary thoughts, and make sure it is very clear that this is a draft, that this is just a starting place and nothing is set in stone until we get into the meeting. However, it is not required by law. And I know sometimes a parent will insist, I want a draft this many days ahead of time. And it's not something that you have to do. It's a courtesy, and it can really be to your benefit to make it happen. But I know with schedules right now and shortages and all this other kind of stuff, we're lucky to meet a lot of our IEP dates, let alone giving, draft IEPs in advance. So I feel your pain on this stuff. Just do the best you can, but know that it is not a legal requirement. Make sure that if you're going to share anything that's negative, that the parent should expect it. Yes, we do need to talk about some negative stuff sometimes in conferences, but you don't want to blindside anyone. And coming to a meeting and saying, I need to talk to you because your child has missed 13 days of school and has been counted truant. And the parent says, wait, what? I had no idea. Nobody told me about this. Or that the student has gotten so many detentions, or that the student is missing 14 homework assignments. If that is the first time I hear about that as a parent, I'm probably going to be upset. And I'm going to be processing, right? So now if I'm processing, I don't hear anything else you're talking about because I'm wondering, why didn't somebody tell me? Why didn't I know about this? What's going on with my kid? There are all these different things that are probably spinning, and you've lost the parent at that point. So even sending out, if there's some key things that you're going to talk about, sending it out ahead of time saying, here are some of the things that we're going to be discussing. Maybe you have some more information that you can bring about this, but just know that we're going to be talking about them. It's not always bad to spring a little good news on someone at the last minute because, that changes the mood. But sometimes you want to tell a parent some good things in advance too, especially if it means that they're going to maybe be able to build on that and give you some additional information for what to do next. All right, during the meeting, somebody needs to greet the parent. And one of the things that can be really helpful is just to provide that list to your school secretary, receptionist, whoever is the first person that everyone sees when they come into the building, so that they can say, oh, yes, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, we've been expecting you. Somebody will be down to get you. Something that just lets them know you're welcome in this school, because many of our parents don't necessarily feel welcome in schools, and not necessarily because anyone's, gone out of their way to make them feel unwelcome, but it may be that school was not the best experience for them. I personally had a great school experience. I loved school. I was one of those kids who during the summer just couldn't wait to get back to school. However, every case conference that I went to for, not case conference, I'm sorry, parent teacher conference that I went to for my own child, I was a bundle of nerves, and she was a decent student. So my palms would sweat, my voice would quiver, and I would get emotional very quickly about any little thing that might be negative. And so I recognize that this has got to be magnified for a parent of a student with a disability. So anything that we can do to take the edge off that would be very helpful. So making sure that everyone knows to expect them, and really try to never bring a parent into an already filled room. To walk in and just see that everyone's already here is very nerve-wracking. So to get a parent in and then pull the last two people in or something like that can be helpful, or keep everyone standing so that the parent can figure out where they're going to sit and not have like the one seat left for the parent where they don't really have a choice in things. You may have the student go down and get their parent if the student's a little older too. Make sure that parents are seated in a good spot. They should have the primo seat where they can see everything, they can communicate with everyone, and that they're not feeling like I'm on display. And try to, be mindful about if they do have people with them that they can sit with the people that they brought, unless that's not what they're looking for. But just make sure that the room arrangement that you choose within the confines of the space that you have, which I know is sometimes limited, that you set it up so that we can get the most amount of communication and visibility, and that we're all on an equal playing field around the table. Be as welcoming as you can, and that doesn't mean you need to have a buffet sitting there, but I've been in very long meetings that ran like over lunchtime, and I am starving by the end of them. You'll also notice when you go into most case conferences that the staff at school, they come prepared. I've got my water bottle, I've got my coffee cup over here, and I may have snacks. And sometimes a parent walks in and they have nothing with them, or they may have another child with them. And, many times they're lucky to find a pen or a scrap of paper in their purse or their pocket or whatever. So having some, just scrap paper, notepads, pens that you've stolen from hotel meetings, things like that are just available so that nobody even has to ask. It's just there are mints on the table or something like that that's cheap and easy to take the edge off of things, and making sure that parents know you're welcome to any of these things that you need. I have a lot of memories of teachers saying, oh, you can get in touch with me anytime. And they're being very friendly. Here's my email. And they rattle it off, and the parent has no pen, nothing to write on. And they're kind of at a loss. So providing that, again, it helps level the playing field and makes parents feel more welcome. Definitely do good introductions, and make sure that you train your staff. And it doesn't even have to be a formal training, but just we're going to go around the room and introduce ourselves. And what I want you to do is tell your name, and then make sure and explain what your role is in the meeting, and if you teach the student, what you teach. So, somebody may say, well, I'm Johnny's teacher for social studies, and I'm serving as the gen ed teacher for this meeting. Or sometimes you're in meetings where you're not sure who the public agency representative is. You may have the director of special education sitting next to the school principal. Well, it's not automatic who is the PAR. So making sure to point that out. I know it should have been on the invitation for the meeting. However, it's just helpful to really lay that out for the parent while they're sitting there too. Make sure, and again, in keeping that level playing field, that you try to use the same level of formality. So if you're on a first name basis, everyone should really be on a first name basis. If I'm Dr. McKinney and then we call mom, that already sets up that big power differential, and we don't want that. So I just introduce myself as Angie, and, I'm the school psychologist. And then, you may want to start with kind of how a parent introduces themselves and go from there too. Some people are very particular about their titles. They think, I worked really hard for this degree, by golly, I want it used. That's fine. Then mom is going to be Mrs. Smith. Just so that, again, we keep it as level as we can be. If there are other roles that are happening, point those out too. Sometimes we've got a lot of computers up and running during a meeting, and parents may wonder what is going on those different computers. So to say, this person is going to be typing into the IEP. This person is going to be taking our notes for the IEP. And then I'm going to have my computer up and running so I can access PowerSchool and we can have good information on grades, attendance, that kind of stuff. If not, your computer should probably be closed so that we're not emailing, we're not online shopping, any of the things that could be happening on a computer. Same thing with phones. I mean, it would be ridiculous to say we're all going to hide our phones away during a meeting, but if you could ask for people to keep them silent, but if you're not going to be able to because you are the person on call for the building, or you have a sick child at home and you need to have the ringer on, just call it out in the beginning. I am so sorry, but I'm going to have to leave my phone on for whatever reason. And then again, it's that transparency of saying, I recognize that it's kind of an interference to the meeting, but I really can't get around it. Use an agenda whenever you can. And just a general framework agenda is important, but if you can present this or develop it and then stick to it, it helps us to follow that IEP process without jumping ahead. So we don't want to start talking about services when we haven't even established the present levels for the student. So you can use this as a tool. All right, ground rules. I use ground rules at meetings too when I facilitate, mainly because just like classroom rules, if we don't have the rules, I can't enforce the rules. So being able to say, here's what I'm going to ask so that we have a really good meeting, and is everyone okay with this? Then if I have to call someone out on it, they usually take it very well. If I say, we said we were going to ask questions and you kind of look like you might have a question about this. Usually someone will say, absolutely, here's my question. Or one person talking at a time. Remember, we said we were all going to talk one person at a time so that we can hear each other. Be respectful. I mean, we got to respect time. We got to respect input. We got to respect someone's point of view. It doesn't mean that we always agree with everything, but just making sure that we create that environment of respect. All right, notice the procedural safeguards. I know you had a whole video on this, so I'm not going to go over like when you have to use the notice of procedural safeguards. However, I do want to point out that just sliding it across the table does not make a parent informed. So what I would really encourage you to do is have, especially your special education teachers, develop a little elevator speech of, here are the most important things that are within this notice. We can't go over everything prior to a meeting. However, we can talk to them about some of the key things. And it may be different from meeting to meeting, depending on if we're talking, we're there talking about behavior or something else. There may be some things we want to point out that we wouldn't necessarily point out to every parent. But to just say, here's some of the basics, and you can have this and read over it. And if you have any other questions, then I'm happy to answer them. But making sure parents are informed is an important part of gaining informed consent to things like an IEP, an evaluation, any of those things. Make sure that we're using good words, right? We're respectful, we're data-based, right? We're not using, my thoughts, this kid is lazy, this kid is unmotivated. I'm talking about data of things like, he puts his head down an average of 9 times per class period, and I have to ask him to pull his head up. That's different than, this kid is unmotivated. I don't know what's going on, but I can tell you what the data shows me. Try to avoid acronyms as much as possible. And, you do it yourself, but then also calling your staff members out on that. And not in a disrespectful way, but to say, I'm not sure if mom knows what LRE is. Can you explain that a little bit more? Or you don't even have to put it back on the parent. Sometimes just to say, I'm not sure what you mean by such and such, and then have them explain it to you. Usually you'll see the parent going, oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure what that was either, but I didn't want to say it. Make sure that that present level information is present. It is current information. It's not from 6 months ago. And then making sure that we're balancing the negatives and the positive. And that's sometimes difficult to do. So if you've got a lot of negative stuff to say, you're going to have to dig deep for as many positives as you can think of. It's important that we are adding in the positives, but we're not misleading. We're not avoiding reality. Like, what we don't want is for a parent to show up to a 9th grade meeting and be told that your child is not on track or is not on diploma track. And a parent say, but every year I've been told he's a really good student and he's making all A's. Sometimes we over sugarcoat things. And again, going back to that general education teacher role, having that good comparison between this student and other students at that grade level can be very enlightening for the whole group, not just for the parent, but can help give us a better understanding of really what's going on with the student. Okay, just for the sake of time, I am going to skip this. And I know this is a whole lot of sit and get. However, I want to make sure that we get to the tips at the end. And I'm afraid I'm going to struggle with that. I usually plan way too much for things. So I'm going to skip this. But I think you can all think of some things that you've heard people say in meetings that instantly you see feathers get ruffled, right? Certain words, lazy, unmotivated. Those are 2 that I hear that parents go, oh, you just see an instant reaction. We can't do that. That's another one that just sends people over the edge. And it's something that we shouldn't be saying anyway. But I know you probably got your own examples for this. Using a parking lot can be helpful too. It just says, okay, this really isn't an IEP thing, or it is an IEP thing, but we can't get to it yet. We're going to get to it later in the agenda. So that's, again, when we push back on that agenda and say, this is the point in the agenda where we're going to be talking about this. And so glad you mentioned it. And it's really important. So I'm going to write it right here or put it in a parking lot. So we heard you, and we're going to keep moving through the process. But it can be really helpful. It seems pretty simple, but it can be very helpful. A lot of different techniques that you can use when we butt heads, and we do butt heads at meetings. That's just, and it's not always parent and school butting heads. Sometimes it's staff members that have very different opinions about what should be happening, or that just don't operate in meetings in a way that is collaborative. So, there are a lot of different things that we can do here. And some of that is, sometimes we have to limit the amount of time that somebody has to talk. I'm just for the sake of time, I'm going to give everyone 1 minute to give their input on this. Is everyone okay with that? You got to get everybody on board with things, and then just do a timed talk, restating things. And there are many times when somebody will say something and I will restate it and have them hear it out loud and go, okay, yeah, I said that, but that's not really what I meant to say. Or sometimes reflecting back to a person or summarizing what they say. And then you may find that you've misinterpreted what they've said. So it gives people a chance to change what they've said or clarify it in a different way. So again, lots of different things that you could do. And these are things that our facilitators have been trained on using. But it's kind of a training in and of itself. Going back to the basics, use your agenda and ground rules when things kind of get off track. Sometimes you'll find that you just need to acknowledge the elephant in the room. There are many times where there's something that someone is upset about, and if we don't just go ahead and talk about it, then nobody's listening to anything. Another technique that, as the public agency representative, I would suggest you use often, because many people will look to you for the answer, right? They may say, oh, Mrs. Washburn, tell us your opinion on this. When you boomerang something, say, I'd really like to hear what you all think about this first. Push it back out there, because many times as the PAR, you're seen as the authority, you're seen as the decision maker, and you want to make sure that you're facilitating a collaborative discussion that gets input from the whole group. You don't want people to just tell you what they think you want to hear. So, and I do that as the psychologist a lot of times too, because that's another role where somebody will look to me and say, well, does she qualify? I'm like, well, here's the information, here's the law. Tell me what you guys think. You can boomerang a lot of things back to parents too, because parents will say, well, what are you going to do about this? And when you say, well, tell me what your thoughts are, what do you think could be done? Start from there and build on that. And that keeps pushing away from kind of that predetermination thinking of school already knows exactly what they're going to do, and they're not going to be open to negotiating. Well, when you come in and you get input from everyone and then can make the best decision, that is as far from predetermination as you can really get. Be very careful with humor. I like to use a lot of humor in meetings, but I try to only use humor that is targeted at me. Sometimes things get a little silly and it will break the tension. I never take the risk of using humor that has anything to do with the parent, because I don't know how they're going to react. And if I think I know how they're going to react, I think, oh, I know this parent, they're going to think this is funny. I'm usually wrong. So keep it turned back at yourself of, oh my gosh, I didn't get that either. That it pulls things back on you. But just, keep it to a minimum, but it can be used in a very cautious kind of way. Again, accepting and legitimizing input is, that can really be helpful. And a lot of what you can do with that is to say, you know what, I'm going to write this on a piece of chart paper so that we don't forget it. That again, it doesn't say that we're going to do it, we're going to agree with it. It says, I heard you, and it was important enough to where I want to make sure that we all see it. Or you can, even just repeating it back. When I give input, I don't know whether anyone's heard me until someone acknowledges it. And by saying, what I heard you say was this. Okay, I know now that you heard me and that you got my input. Taking breaks, there's nothing, a 5-minute break can save you a half an hour to an hour sometimes just by taking that break. And I would say if there are times when you as the PAR need to get a question answered, a question related to the law, a question related to resources, so that you do feel comfortable committing certain resources on behalf of the school, take a break and do it. Make that phone call. Don't give information that you're not sure of when you could take a break and say, I'm going to find out for sure. Try to make sure that you don't always assume that because I didn't say I don't like it, that I'm on board. And that includes everyone. So going around and just saying, are we all good with this section? Okay, I didn't hear anything, then let's move on. You're going to miss something there. Instead, going around, making some eye contact and saying, do you have any questions here? How about you? How about you? Going around the room. Or can you give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, or a sideways if you're not sure yet? Just so that you can truly see who's on board with what. And when you get agreements along the way throughout the conference, you find yourself less and less looping back, right? So some of the meetings that you've probably been in that were a little rough were ones where you thought you had this covered, and we move on to the next section, and suddenly we're back in the previous section because, it triggered something else. If you can get agreements that we're good with this, we're not going back there, let's move on to the next part, then it helps to move things along quicker. And then at the end of the meeting, let parents know what's happening next. When am I going to get the IEP? How's it going to come home? All that kind of stuff. And then make sure that somebody is walking the parent out. What you don't want to have happen is that a parent is kind of dismissed from a room, but everybody else stays sitting there, because the automatic assumption is they're going to sit and talk about me, which may or may not be true. We may be kind of processing the what next from this meeting, but that's going to lead to some negative feelings later. So, again, people need to disperse, or there are times when we have back-to-back meetings scheduled during a day. And if that's the case and you're going to be staying there, then I would tell the parent that we've all got another meeting coming up. So thank you so much for coming in, and we're going to have somebody walk you out. And then following up after, again, this is a really important part of the law, and it sometimes gets a little wonky as far as making sure that we follow the dates correctly. So most of the places in Article 7 use instructional days as what they're talking about. And there are a couple of places that it's different, and this is one of them. So what it says is when we have an IEP meeting, then a parent has to get the copy, the finalized proposal of their IEP in their hands. So they have to receive it within 10 business days. And that's really important because, if we're holding case conferences right up to the last minute prior to Christmas break, or at the end of this school year, or right before spring break, we're going to need to send those things out prior to leaving. Those business days are ticking Monday through Friday, even when school is not in session. So just making sure that we are getting that to the parents as quickly as possible. So it says within 10 business days. And then after that, after the parent gets it in their hands, then we're going to, if it's not a new or it's not a first IEP, then we're going to implement that on the 11th instructional day, so school day, after a parent gets the copy, or they could sign it and implement it sooner. Now, that's really important because if there's something that we want to start happening right away and we wait 10 business days to give it to the parent, and then we don't hear back from the parent, so we wait another 2 school weeks before we can implement that, we're talking about a month. And that's a long time to wait to put in a behavior plan or something like that. So really think about, is it something that we need to have happen quickly? Now, the only thing that doesn't let that IEP get implemented on the 11th day is if the parent uses one of their options that's on the back page of the IEP that talks about, if I'm not happy with this, then I can ask for mediation. I can ask for a meeting with somebody from the school who has the authority to negotiate these differences, or I can file for due process. Saying I don't like it doesn't stop the IEP. Filing a complaint does not stop the IEP from going in place, but those other things do. So make sure that you know the differences. All right, I'm going to skip this again because I still have a lot to get through here, and we're down to 25 minutes. So jumping into manifestation determinations, fun times. So we're going to look at some of the key things that you need to know and do, and some of the prevention pieces. So just starting with Article 7, Article 7 has a specific definition for a manifestation determination, but some things to point out within this definition is that, number one, it's an evaluative process, which means we're using data and we're reviewing things to determine the outcome here. It also says that it is conducted by the case conference committee, not by the director, not by the public agency representative. It's not a one-person show. It is the whole case conference committee that needs to pull together and make this decision about whether or not the student, number one, either had behaviors that had a direct and substantial relationship to the student's disability, okay? Or in the second case, it was caused by the result of us not putting the IEP in place, right? Meaning, if we didn't follow the behavior plan, we didn't implement the IEP correctly. If the student wasn't getting what was on the IEP, then we didn't implement the IEP correctly. So there's some, different situations where the IEP was the cause of the student's misbehavior or their conduct. Some key things to know for administrators or anyone else who's serving in this role. If you remove, by law, if you remove a student for even a part of a day, if you say, you're going to go home for the rest of the day, and it has to do with removing them for disciplinary reasons, that's counted as a whole day. The only time that it's not counted is if there's something specific in the IEP that, we have a few students out there who we know that if things are just really going south, then they may need to be removed for a short period of time in order to kind of regroup. But that would be determined by the case conference committee, and it would be part of the IEP formally. So when we suspend, it's a removal. Every day that they're suspended is a removal. If they have in-school suspension, it might be a removal. And in many, many cases, it is considered a removal, even though they're coming to school. The only time it's not is if that they are given the opportunity to make progress in the general ed curriculum. So not necessarily sitting in a gen ed class, but making progress in the general ed curriculum. And I'm getting the special education services that my IEP says I'm getting. That's really hard to do. And that I'm participating with non-disabled students to the extent I would in my current placement. So if I'm a student that is mostly in with non-disabled students during the day, then if I'm in school, I should also be in with non-disabled students. If you can satisfy those requirements, it may not be a removal. It's better to err on the side of thinking that if you're not sure, that count it as a removal. The other thing to know is that specifically, if I have transportation as a service on my IEP and I am kicked off the bus, then it is a removal, unless we're able to get to school, right? So mom agrees to bring me, whether we're paying mom, whether we're not paying mom, we arrange for an Uber, we send a different bus, whatever it is. If we can get the kid to school, it's not a removal. But if because I needed special transportation and we say, you can't ride this bus for 3 days, and so I can't get to school, those have to be counted as removals from school. Those removals are important because the threshold is that we're going to have a manifestation determination if I either have more than 10 consecutive days, 10 days in a row, then it is definitely a change of placement, and a change of placement triggers that manifestation determination. Or if I have more than 10 days cumulatively, then we've got to figure it out, right? So is it a pattern? Are they clustered together? Are they related to the same kinds of behaviors? There are a lot of things that can help us figure out whether or not a change of placement has occurred. So if I'm getting, if I've had 1 day out a month, then maybe it's not really a change of placement by the end of the year. Most districts have opted to just say, you know what, we're not even looking at it. If you go more than 10 days, we're just going to automatically assume that a change of placement has occurred and go ahead and have that manifestation determination so that it's not in question. But you'll have to look back to see what your own district policy is to know what to do. So as a public agency representative, or making sure that if you're not in the administrator role, that you make sure your administrator knows this. This one is a key. On the day that the decision is made to say, okay, we're going to have a removal and it's going to result in a change of placement, meaning you're up for expulsion, you're up for suspension that would take you beyond 10 days. I have to send that notice of procedural safeguards home to the parent. Absolutely critical. If it doesn't get to them that day, maybe something happened at the ball game that night. You brought alcohol to a ball game, and you're now going to be up for expulsion, and we know that. If it can't happen right then, right there, because nobody's carrying these things in their back pocket, then it has to be mailed the following business day to the parent. And then we have to both schedule and hold that manifestation determination within 10 instructional days. All this stuff is just straightforward from the law. So here are some of the things that is really important to know is, again, we got to make sure that those removals are accurately documented so that we've got a good current count and we don't, cross that 10 days without knowing that it happened. It's important for administrators to make sure that special ed teachers keep a close eye on this too. And that if I'm sending a kid home, I let you know to make sure that we're on top of this and we can get ahead of it. Anytime that we can do like a functional behavioral assessment before we ever get to this point, we're more likely to be able to get ahead of things. And if we're going to be using in-school suspension And there's an opportunity to actually not count this as a removal and have the teacher provide services. Again, as a teacher of record, I need to know that. So making sure that communication is happening. Now, when we're at the meeting, we're making this decision, right? We're getting all the stuff together and determining what exactly is going on. So anytime that we say, absolutely, there is a manifestation relationship, then we've got to see what we need to fix, right? If it was a failure of the IEP, we got to fix that piece. And we have to do an FBA and behavior plan, or look at ones that are already there and see if we need to update those or make any changes. And we have to put the student back in the placement that they were taken from. Unless we have at the meeting, we determine that a change should happen and we're in agreement with that. So you can change that placement, but parents need to be on board in order for that to happen. Otherwise, students need to go back to the placement they came from. If there's no manifestation relationship, then we can go ahead and hand down discipline, just like we would to non-disabled students. However, we have to figure out, what are we going to do next? Because a student with a disability needs to have appropriate services to make sure that I'm making progress, I'm working towards my IEP goals, and if I need a functional behavioral assessment and behavior plan in order to not have this happen again, then we get on top of that as well. We do have that exception for those really, really extreme situations where if I bring a weapon to school, if I use or possess illegal drugs, or I'm selling controlled substances, or I inflict serious bodily injury on someone else. It's not that I have the potential to inflict serious bodily injury. I have to nearly kill someone, or, something super serious in order to qualify for this inflicting serious bodily injury kind of clause. Then a student can be placed into an interim alternative educational setting for up to 45 instructional days. But still got to have that manifestation. But it doesn't matter whether there was a relationship or not. When we have the manifestation, those situations can keep you in that interim alternative setting. So make sure and tell your teachers, bring data, absolutely bring data. And then also be looking for data that is specific to the behavior. And historically, what have we seen? What have we tried? Have there been plans to address this in the past? And then some specific information related to the student's disability. So things that we can do is just making sure we have good communication. Make sure everybody knows what their part is so that we're actually implementing the IEP. Giving out, if there's behavior plan, if we need those IEP at a glance given out, then everybody knows their part. And when a student is sent to the office, there should be some sort of trigger that says, oh, teacher of record needs to know about this. Make sure that all staff knows their part in a behavior plan. Some behavior plans are kind of complicated. So making sure that I know how it should go down so that it's not that I think I'm doing it right. I'm actually going to implement this correctly. So when you have the meeting, sorry, it's that allergy stuff again. Make sure and review all the information we have, but don't get locked into a discussion about whether or not it happened. That happens at another meeting. That happened in the principal's office where we determined that, yes, this happened and we're handing down this discipline. Now it's the only discussion is, this is what you were up for discipline for. And we're looking at that connection between that and your disability or a problem with the IEP. So really think about those characteristics of a disability. Does it tend to show impulsiveness, explosiveness? Does it impair your cognitive ability? Whatever is really relevant to that particular behavior that the student got in trouble for. And then always making sure that it is a team decision. So, boomeranging that back to say, based on all of this information that we've just discussed, what are you all thinking about this? All right, so I know I only have a few minutes. So I just want to point out what I think are just 10 solid tips for helping your district stay in compliance. So number one, stay at the meetings and be active. Don't be a silent participant. Again, you've got a huge role as the public agency representative to commit these resources. Don't commit the resources just to make someone happy. Make sure that it is doable and that it is appropriate. All kids are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. So making sure that it's appropriate. Try not to leave. I have a lot of times where the administrator who's serving as the PAR role is also on bus duty and maybe has another meeting to step into. You're going to have an excusal to make that legitimate, and that's really hard to do and still serve the role as the PAR. So if you can streamline those meetings, then you're more likely to be able to be present throughout the meeting. Always make sure that we have a really true discussion of the least restrictive environment for a student, that we're always pushing back to, could we potentially do this in a less restrictive setting? Could we do this in the general ed classroom? And if not, just making sure that we're always finding as many ways as we can to include students with disabilities in all aspects of their education. Be as aware as you can. Have yourself a running list of, who are the kids with IEPs? Which one of them also have a behavior plan? Who's, climbing the charts as far as their removals? Keep your eye on these kids. Have a radar so that, you don't let things get ahead of you. Having a way to document things within your building, making sure that your teachers are documenting the things that they're doing too. So how do I ensure that that teachers of record are giving their staff that IEP at a glance? How do I make sure that accommodations are being implemented as listed on the IEP? How do we document that? When we need to have staff training, do I have good documentation of that? Anytime that I meet with a parent about something or have a parent contact, am I entering that in some sort of a system, whether it's in the IEP system or whether it's in one of your student information systems? Doesn't matter, as long as it's available to pull up whenever needed. And you've got a million other things that you need to document as well, but those are some of the key things that tend to be problematic. Try to think about, if you're a building administrator, looking for the implementation of students' IEPs into your walkthroughs. So having a way to look for some of those things that you should be seeing so that accommodations are happening. That teachers are aware of the specially designed instruction that should be happening for students. They say what is inspected is respected. So making sure that everyone knows, I'm going to be looking for this stuff and giving some feedback on that. Try to be the Article 7 expert. Not everyone is going to be an Article 7 expert, but if you can at least have it handy, it's a searchable PDF. I have it on my computer. I probably pull it up 2 to 3 times a day to answer questions because I like to see it in writing before I give an answer, but keep it handy. It is listed on the Padlet, both the Spanish version, I think I put the parent rights in Spanish there, but the Article 7, the most current version is right there handy. So download that if you want to, or just pull it up from the Padlet. Try to strike that balance between what everyone wants, right? You've got what the parent wants, what teachers want, other people there, and then you've also got what the law says. So you have to fall back on offering a free, appropriate public education, not necessarily the Cadillac version of that, but definitely not a clunker, right? We've got to be able to help the student to make meaningful progress. And we have to think about what that takes. But sometimes when we cave to what a parent wants, and it's not the right thing to do, but we did it because we didn't want to battle, then we're stuck with it. So always be having that discussion about what does the student really need? What is the right thing for the student? Make sure that you're aware of some of those key timelines. And these are 3 that we talked about, but there are many, many timelines involved. These are ones that you can have some influence over, though. Getting that notice of procedural safeguards home if a decision is made about discipline. Making sure that those manifestation determination meetings happen on time, and making sure that your teachers get those IEPs to the parents on time. These are things that will trigger a complaint. I'm telling you, when you miss these deadlines, you're probably going to get a complaint. When helping to develop the IEP, also be thinking about beyond the classroom, right? So what does the student need? And many students don't need things beyond the classroom, but some do. And if we're looking at a student who needs like an aid, and that student is also has made the basketball team, right? Then they may need to have that aid that is there for basketball games or practices. Or maybe they needed an interpreter. Or it could be that, if I have a behavior plan, well, my behavior plan should follow me on the bus, in the cafeteria. And it may follow me to school-sponsored events. Schools have been dinged for not following plans in all settings that were school-sponsored or related. So having that discussion about what do we likely anticipate that the student needs? And then finally, just reinforcing that message that all really does mean all. All students are all our students. All students belong. All students matter. All students have a right to be part of things. And as somebody in that role of public agency representative, that is really important, and that's a message that you all can reinforce. All right, so I know there are a couple extra questions, and I am going to see what I can do about getting to a couple of these. I'm going to have this up, though. You can scan this with your camera, or you can type in the link to complete a quick evaluation. And also the link on the right is if you want to register for any of our other trainings that we have available through the catalog, you can do that here. I'm going to look back through a couple of questions. So if you don't want to hear the questions, you're welcome to sign off. And I really appreciate everyone being here, but I'm going to stick with these for a couple of minutes. Can you discuss how this applies to bringing in speech-only preschoolers that don't have a gen ed teacher? Okay, well, you can either have someone to fill that role that has knowledge about the appropriate, typical skills at that level, or you can ask for an excusal in that case. That can be difficult. Now, I know when I've worked in the past, I had someone who served as the gen ed teacher that was from our co-op, that had a background in early childhood, and she would sign as the gen ed teacher in that case. Determining whether a student is part-time ED or full-time ED. I'm not sure if there's super clear guidance of that. If you think about part-time or full-time ED, well, you're either ED or you're not. But what that's saying is, with my emotional disability, do I need supports and services all of the time or part of the time? So if I'm in a pull-out room that is, a behavior room kind of thing, we know that's full-time ED. If I can go into the gen ed classroom, but I need a paraprofessional in there with me, that's full-time ED, even though I'm in the gen ed setting. But if I'm a kid who just needs a milder amount of services, then it could be a part-time ED student who just needs occasional support. We need to have that backup plan. They maybe do a check-in, check-out. I don't think there's a hard and fast percentage kind of rule, because it's not really determined by your least restrictive environment code. It really has to do with how much support does this student need in order to get through the day. Brianna, the webinar, I don't think we are going to upload it, but I will send it to the link to everyone who registered. So all of you will get a link to this, but I don't think we're posting it on the website as of now. Regarding gen ed teachers at the meeting, that's preschooler again. A good agenda, and I'm not sure if anyone was able to answer this, a good agenda that has been helpful. I will upload just what we use as our facilitators that is strictly a bare bones agenda. I will upload that onto the Padlet so that everyone can have what we use as well as our ground rules. And you're welcome to use those, but tweak them. I mean, sometimes you have parents who would like to have a little more detail, but it's just, present levels, goals, provisions and services. It's mainly just so I can point people back to, we're here right now, and you're trying to talk about some stuff that's way down here. So we will get there. But again, you may need to have more detail for some people. Procedure for a student who is suspended 10 days pending homebound. Allison, I am not sure what you mean by pending homebound. You can unmute yourself if you like. That might make it easier. I went ahead and gave you permission to talk.
Okay, so I have a student in my...
I have a feeling that I may have yes, I have my computer off. Okay, start over, Allison.
Okay, sorry. I have a student in an applied skills classroom who was caught molesting a student. So we have suspended him for 10 days. And we're going to have a manifestation meeting to determine whether or not it was a result of his disability. However, we've kind of already decided, just because the student's history, that whether or not it's part of his disability or not, that maybe homebound is the best decision for him. So is that following Article 7?
If that is your only option, then no. But you're close there, because if you come to the meeting and say, we're going to do the manifestation as we should and make a determination. If you determine that it is related, then again, you have to put him back into that classroom unless you can agree with the parent that something else is more appropriate. So if the parent is on board, you're good to go. If the parent is not on board and says, you know, my child needs to be back in this classroom, it's all because of his disability, then you got to figure out what you do next. And that could be going through due process. It also could be that you may have to take steps related to legal action so that the student wouldn't be allowed there, you know. Or sometimes we have to call the police in on certain things that are criminal kinds of things. But I know it's a very fine line when you're talking about a student that has significant disabilities that may not understand that something was wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if we
Okay.
have the meeting and we keep an open mind, we go in there with an open mind and open options, but we suggest homebound and the parent agrees, then we're good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And technically, if they've only had the 10 days, you don't have to have a manifestation yet. If you had one more day, but if what you would have done was move for expulsion on a typical student, then it's probably a good idea to go ahead and have that manifestation because you need to have this conversation anyway. So it's crossing the 10-day line that prompts the manifestation, but you could have one sooner. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having one sooner. All right. Well, here is my contact information, and reach out anytime that you have questions, and I will pull up my Article 7 and do my best to answer them. Or if not, I'll get you to the right person who can answer it better. Thank you all so much for attending. I appreciate everyone being here, and look for your certificate. It may be this week, it may be sometime next week, but I would appreciate any feedback that you have. Thank you so much. And thank you, Kara, for your captioning services today.